Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So welcome back to this next episode of the Basics of Sikhi podcast. And today we have a very special topic, a very powerful, moving one as well. And that's for many reasons, I guess, right, which we can discuss today as well. And that's on 1984, right? So just straight away, Mandeep Singh, first of all, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us about 1984 with all the research and codes that you've done, over the years. And you've done multiple talks in 1984, right? And the days before and after, right? But just one question, just to start off with quickly then, is if somebody says 1984 to you, what's the first word, or maybe what is the first thought that comes to your mind when you think about the word 1984?
Revolution. That's the first thought that comes to mind. And I think a lot of people won't think of that initially. They'll think of massacre or genocide or shaheedi, and rightly so, or maybe even a Akal Takht. But there's a massive context to 1984. It was not an isolated incident. It wasn't this last minute attack and the rhetoric that's used by the state where they had to attack or there's no other options. That was the furthest thing from the truth. There was a revolution taking place, and it wasn't necessarily for Khalistan. It was for the rights of the Punjabis and the rights of the Sikh in Punjab. But then that resultantly led to the Sikh deciding that they had no other option and realizing that they weren't happy and also safe in their own so-called country, that the only other option was now to fight and to struggle for an autonomous state.
Sorry, just to make it relatable for people who can't put their mind into the context of this. How could we explain it in a way that they could understand today? Like, what were the Sikhs going through at that time? What were they living that they got to this point?
Yeah, so should we start with that? Just the context is.
Hanji, we can go for the overview. Hanji, definitely.
Yeah, so I think it's important. Obviously, 1984, for anyone that's unaware, marks in June, anyways, the attack on the 1st of June, and that lasted for around 10 days and slightly longer than that. The attack on Sri Harmandir Sahib, also known as the Golden Temple, by the Indian state, by the Indian army, in which tens of thousands of innocent Sikh were made shaheed and killed in cold blood for no apparent reason other than they were Sikh and their own identity. And when we saw these amazing shaheeds, these amazing Gursikhs put up a fight against the Indian state army and achieve things that no one ever thought would be possible. And the Sakhiyan will touch on those later on as to specific people and what they did and how they defended and what that defense looked like. But it definitely wasn't an isolated incident, as I mentioned before, and that's paramount to understanding why things happened and what the build-up was. And we can trace it back to partition in 1947, where Punjab was split in half by the British as they were leaving India, and the so-called Radcliffe Line that created Pakistan on the left-hand side of Punjab and what's now Punjab or part of Punjab in India today. And if you look at the map of Punjab, it used to be like a butterfly. The shape mimicked a butterfly, and that got literally sawn in half. And even from then, where we had, just very briefly, Sikhs being offered their own country, cutting a long story short, you had the Muslims, led by the Muslim League, obtaining Pakistan, and then obviously Hindus, if you like, or Congress Party at that time, obtaining India. And all these false promises by the likes of Nehru, who was the Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of India, the father of Indira Gandhi, and also people like Mohandas Gandhi, who is known for being the savior in India, which is not the case at all. People like them, quote unquote, saying that we see no reason why the Sikhs can't experience the glow of freedom in the north region of India if they stay with India. And for many reasons, the Sikhs decided to stay with India. The declaration was created for India as a state. It was organized as it is now. And then what you find is Punjab in particular is singled out and bullied, if you like, and not treated, let alone in a special consideration, but on par with every other state. Things like the Punjabi language was attacked and is still being attacked. Sikhi in its own identity is not recognized. And even till today, the 1949-1950 Constitution of India has not been signed by any Sikh, because under Article 25, subclause B, it says that we are just a branch of Hinduism. So you see all these indifferences coming about, electricity, if you still go to India today, Punjab today, bijli cut jandi hai na. We still see those things.
So in February when we went as well.
Yeah, and no one drinks the water there, right? But it's crazy because the amount of water that we have in Punjab and electricity is produced in Punjab. So why is it that we're not getting our fair share? All these things, as well as other things, both culturally, geographically, economically, and religiously, were what the Sikh and the Punjabis were fighting for in these 40 years or so that led up to 1984. So that's a general overview. We can go into specifics chronologically as we progress through that topic. But it's really important to realize that this started in 1947. And then, in essence, our demands not being met led to the Indian Army or the state of India saying that we need to teach these guys a lesson. The way we're going to do that is by hitting them right at the heart. And that was June 1984.
And so, these demands, they were drafted into an official document, right, called the Anandpur Sahib Resolution. So could you just touch and explain on what that is?
Hanji, so in 1971, a lot of the main Gursikhs of the Panth came together and took 2 years to draft this resolution. So by then we would have had the Punjabi Subha movement 10-15 years earlier, which argued for Punjab to have its first language as Punjabi. So it's crazy we're even saying that, right? Imagine in England, English wasn't the first preferred language, right? Or we had to speak French. That's the equivalent of the things people were protesting for, being killed for, and putting their livelihoods on the line for. So putting that, bypassing that, and also we had the Punjab Reorganisation Act in 1966, I believe, where the Punjab from partition was then cut into a third. So then we have Haryana and another state, Himachal Pradesh, actually being detrunked from Punjab. And now we see the original the heart of the butterfly, if you like, of Punjab as we know it. So then in 1971, the Gursikhs came together and realized, right, we need to tackle this professionally, if you like, or by the law, however you want to think about this. We need to start organizing ourselves to be serious about this. And for 2 years, they deliberated and did vichar and came together. And they have this set of resolutions called the Anandpur Sahib resolutions, which talks about many, many things, economic policies, fair investment for Punjab. It was unproportionate in terms of the GDP Punjab produced for India and the timely percentage of funding we were getting back as a return. Also things like having autonomy in terms of a state, giving Chandigarh back to Punjab, because even till today, the capital of Punjab is Chandigarh, which is geographically outside of Punjab, which allows the Indian state to call it a union territory, which means that as every other state has some degree of autonomy, that means that Delhi runs Punjab more so than any other state, which obviously paralyzes Punjab in terms of its autonomy and the decision making it has. Other things as simple as being able to broadcast Kirtan from Harmandir Sahib, things we take for granted on PTC Punjab as we watch Raras in the evening and things. Social economic rights, having water, demands met, having electricity, farmers, we heard about the Kisan Morcha, having fair crop prices. All of these things are not recent things, that people have been fighting for these since 1947.
So these are just basic human rights, which you would expect in any democratic country that the population should have, right?
Hanji, exactly. And the thing to be critical about is that we're not asking for anything special, even though we were promised special things. And that's really important to understand, because we're just asking for a fair piece of the pie. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. And even if you look at the creation of India as a state, in terms of the lives given for India to be freed from the shackles of the British, we were currently, as Sikhs, a 2% of the population. But figures show that over 70% of people that gave their lives in the Indian independence movement were Sikh. So if you have 2% of a country being represented by a people, and that people giving 70% of the Shaheediyah, you'd think that there should be some special consideration, if not just equal treatment.
Sorry, just to explain, what is Shaheediyah?
Shaheedi is just when someone is given their life for a cause, or in English what we call a martyr. So 70% of the lives given for India's independence were Sikhs, and that was when we made up only 2% of the population.
Wow.
So we're not asking for a lot, just to be on a level playing field, and just so that people can live happily and stably in Punjab, which still isn't the case today.
Like Gurdwara Singh is saying about human rights, right? Something very simple. And was there 2 resolutions, right? There was the first and there was the second Anandpur Sahib resolution.
Hanji, so I believe it was revised in 1978 as well.
Hanji.
And that's when things started to become more serious, because I guess Sikhs had been knocking on the door of India for so long with no response.
And did you want to talk briefly about 1978 as well and the Shaheeds of the 13 Guru Sikhs? Because that did escalate things quite a bit more as well, right, in Sri Harmandir Sahib.
Hanji, so we had, just cutting a long story short, the Shaheeds, the Vaisakhi Shaheeds in 1978, where there were people doing Biadabi or disrespecting Gurbani, disrespecting the Panj Pyare, disrespecting Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and the Nirankari cult, which was state-sponsored, and their leader going around Harmandir Sahib at that point, saying that they've created this new type of Amrit, and instead of Panj Pyare, they've now got Sat Sitare. So mocking the Vaisakhi ceremony, mocking the Amrit Sanchar ceremony, and trying to make a mockery of Sikhi. And we had there were a bunch of Singhs from the Taksal Jatha and also the Akhand Kirtani group that came together and went to peacefully protest, and were met by not only people of the Nirankari cult fighting back and firing back, but also protection from the police as well.
Yeah.
And that led to 13 Singhs being Shaheed, one of the most prominent ones being Shaheed by Fauja Singh Ji, who was a great Gursikh and did a lot to inspire the youth at that point. And that was a real turning point for a lot of Naujawan that then went on to join the freedom movement or the human rights movement, if we call it that, because they realized that we've been trying for the past 20, 30 years to do things peacefully, and we're just being hit with bricks to our faces.
Even longer, I'd say like 50, 60 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you can take it back to the 20s, right? And the Singh Sabha movement and stuff. So that was a poignant time in our history where a lot of people realized that the only way we are going to get our demands met is through force, which is not the primary option the Sikhs wanted to take. But when you're backed into a corner so much and your friends, your family, your religion is on the line, then you have no other option. And that was the case in 1984 and the years after that.
And people like try to shy away from this topic, or this is a taboo thing, that why did Sikhs pick up arms and stuff?
Yeah.
But if we look at our history, it's actually very prominent from the Guru Sahib's time. Whenever anything happened, when Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj was Shaheed, Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji picked up arms, right? When Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji was Shaheed, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj picked up arms. So this stuff comes in our history, but why is it such a taboo subject now in this day and age? Because in this recent times,
that's quite a deep question. I guess we're wondering, why is it somehow in a lot of Sikh, the psyche is that we should not have weapons, or weapons are a bad thing, right? Where it's actually it's in our DNA. And just giving context to what you said, Gurdwara Singh, Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji Maharaj, the 6th Guru, when they created Akal Takht, the governance or the governing body of the Sikhs, if you like, they also created the first army called Akal Sena. Akal means is a name for Waheguru, or the timeless. Sena means army, and that would be where 2,200 horsemen would always be stationed ready. So that was the first version of the Panth's army, and they themselves created an institution at Akal Takht where Shastras were also revered and given a lot of respect, but also to be adorned. So Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji sent out the bachans, the hukams, the instruction to now come and greet me with weapons, with soldiers, with horses, and with anything that we can start defending ourselves with. And a lot of people question, why were they there in a holy place, in a religious place such as Harmandir Sahib with weapons? That was wrong. That was inviting the trouble. And if we look at it, first of all, just from a logical point of view, this was not a last-minute attack. There are plenty of reports to show that in 1982, in Doon Valley, which is a valley just north of Punjab, I believe, there was actually a mock replica of Harmandir Sahib created. And the Indian state, their special forces, were told to create a mock battle plan for what was about to happen in 1984. And also Margaret Thatcher's SAS at that point were sent in to help them plan and prepare this. So that's 2 years prior. Now, obviously, the Singhs and the Panth and the Sikhs realized that these guys have made Harmandir Sahib in a different place. They're reenacting how they're planning to invade Harmandir Sahib. If you have that information as a Sikh and you do nothing about it, that's embarrassing. Now, imagine our homes, imagine you have word that someone's coming to attack your home. You're not going to sit there and watch CBBC, right? You're going to do what you can to defend it, or you might call the police. You'd be reactive and proactive. So in the same way, to anyone that asks why did they have weapons, my question to that would be, why wouldn't you have weapons if you know someone's coming to attack your home? And that's what Harmandir Sahib is. And there are plenty of references, not just in the past 8 years, in the Guru Sahib's time, where the battles of Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji, where people have attacked Amritsar, and Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji spared no one. If you look at the times of Ahmed Shah Abdali, who sent Massa Rangar to go and desecrate Harmandir Sahib, and you have Bhai Sukha Singh Ji, Bhai Mehtab Singh Ji go in and take his head off. There's no two ways about that. We've got the precedent that's been sent by people in the past. Whoever has attacked Harmandir Sahib has only ever met one fate, because there's no other option for that. That is the highest biadabiyat, is the highest disrespect anyone can do for a Sikh. Now, secondly, in Akal Takht itself, there are weapons, and in every Gurdwara there are weapons. And when we take Amrit, we're told to keep weapons and learn the art of weaponry. So it's our duty in a sense. And that's not me saying that. That's not a random person saying it. That's Guru Sahib saying it. And that's Sikhi in its essence.
And it comes in Gurbani, right? About that, ye hai hamare peer.
Hanji.
That we actually do devotional worship to Shastra, to weapons.
Hanji.
That's how high we regard the weapons. So Sikhs aren't really a pacifist religion in that sense, right? But we've been kind of whitewashed or brainwashed to think that, oh, we need to be pacifist or we need to compromise or stuff like this.
Yeah.
But in that sense, we were never like that, right?
No, quite the opposite. And there's an interesting book I was reading about the effect of the British in Punjab. And one of the first things they did was ban a long kirpan. So a kirpan now, unfortunately, we've reduced to a 9-inch, what looks like a Tuksali kirpan. But in the olden days, a kirpan would be a full-on talwar. And one of the first things the British did after the fall of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji's empire in 1847 or 1849, whatever the day is ban having a kirpan longer than a certain length. And a lot of the Gursikhs at that time, that's why they migrated out of Punjab and went to places like Hazur Sahib, which is why we see such tradition still being maintained there, because it's been free of British effect, if you like. So these things have been, instilled with us for a very long time. But I am happy to say that there is, it's quite refreshing to see that a lot of people are trying to connect to the Guru's teaching in its purest form. And a lot of these things are starting to come back. And it's important to realize we're not an aggressive Bantana. We're not going out there to bully people. We act in defense, but also we don't take any crap from anyone. And a lot of people don't like admitting that, right? And that's important to realize.
If you just look at what VG said earlier about being pacifist as well, we can see good examples from Itihas of both sides. That you got the side of tolerance, which is very important as well. So there's being passive, but there's also being very tolerant to things as well. Just like how Guru Arjan Dev Ji, they gave Shahidi, and they showed us the levels of tolerance. Right. So then it was actually them, Guru Arjan Dev Ji, who gave the bachan to Guru Hargobind Ji, to their son, to then pick up weapons.
Right? Exactly.
So people don't even realize that, because they say, why did Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji do that for? Well, you have to realize that it was their father who told them to do that. It was a hukam. When they gave Shahidi, they told the Guru Sikhs, tell my son now to be Shastartari. Right? And even when it came to the battles of Sri Harmandir Sahib, that battle that they fought when their daughter was going to get married, and as well, Bibi Vidoji, I remember reading it, it's like half the soldiers would go and do Ishnan in the Sarovar, and the other half would stand on guard. The Amrit over the pool around the Golden Temple, we refer to it sometimes. But do you get what I mean? So, when people saying that, why was there soldiers in Harmandir Sahib when they attacked? But it's like Guru Hargobind Ji had their Guru Sikhs bathe in the Sarovar before they were fighting and fighting against all the soldiers at that time. I think it was was it Shah Jahan's army? I think it was that was coming to attack. Maybe Jahangir Singh. So just give me some context that first of all, the Guru was showing us a level of tolerance. Like you said, we're not aggressive, Pant. There's always a level of tolerance, whether it was then, whether it was Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji showing the levels of tolerance as well. Even though they fought in one battle, I think it was Kartarpur Sahib, they fought in the third jung of the fourth one. But that's something to highlight, and I think you made that point here. We're not aggressive, but just showing that tolerance is very important. And then from that, then it's time to pick up the sword.
But even in battle, You find a really common tradition with even Guru Sahib. They wouldn't ever attack first. They would let the enemy attack first, and then they would do their var.
And it's important. I know we quote that a lot, and even just saying we're not aggressive, but at the same time, if someone oversteps the line, then we are aggressive, and we shouldn't be afraid to say that. And the gurus themselves dictated that, and people like Sanjay Singh ji, Masarangar, Amish, all those people. Sorry, Bhai Sukha Singh, Bhai Mandeep Singh, Akali Phula Singh, whoever it is, Baba Deep Singh ji themselves, they didn't go out looking for trouble, but when trouble came, then it's no holds back, right? And I think it's important that we're not too tolerant of these things, because then people start walking over us, which is easier said than done.
Yeah, definitely. And then just talking very briefly as well about the Dharam Yudh Morcha as well, the Morcha that are happening at that time as well. Can we touch upon that and what that actually means?
Yeah.
What is a Morcha? What were these Morche happening at that time as well, G?
Yeah.
Leading up to, because there's a lot of Mahapurush, a lot of other Guru Sikhs involved in that, even like someone like Baba Harnam Singh Ji, Rampur Khire, Wale Mahapurush, a lot of people probably heard about and read their books as well.
Yeah.
Involved in like going to like volunteering, how do you say, like going to prisons and going to jail and stuff like that, right?
As all part of a protest, I guess, right? Yeah. So I guess the Dharam Yudh Morcha was a culmination of a few things. And even before then, we have Sant Kartar Singh Ji, who was so the leader of the Damtamri Taksal, right? Who even starts protesting against the Indian state from as early as 1975, when Indira Gandhi actually committed electoral fraud, and the state of Allahabad court actually did her over for this, and it's at that point where she suspended the constitution for 19 months and acted as a dictator. And who were the first people that came out and protested? Did a morcha. Morcha is an agitation, if you like, against this. It was Sant Kartar Singh Ji and the Sikhs. So from the offset, there was always a Sikh that came out, whether it's for the Pala or for the whole cause of India or even Punjab itself. We were the ones standing up. So I guess you could say we've been a thorn in her foot for a long time, which was self-induced. We didn't decide to just go against Indira Gandhi. She planted her own seeds in that sense. But going forward, after the final version of the Anandpur Sahib resolution was drafted in 1978, again, these fell on deaf ears. The demands fell on deaf ears. And under the leadership of Jarnail Singh Ji, they realized that we now have to start taking this a level higher, because through documentation and through paper, nothing's happening. And there we see the start of the Dharam Yudh Morcha, which is a really important agitation within the Sikh Panth. And Dharam means righteous or righteousness. Yudh is a battle. Morcha, again, is agitation. So it's the agitation for a righteous battle, if you like, if we translate that in English. And that's where we see people actively taking to the streets, not just Sikhs, Punjabis, because this was for the livelihood of all Punjabis, Hindu and Muslim as well, also got involved. But then we saw great support from all Jathebandis. You mentioned a lot of Mahapurukhs, a lot of saints like Sant Harnam Singh Ji, Rampur Khairawali, and obviously Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, the Taksal Singhs. And over 250,000 people in Punjab courted arrest in an agitation to this.
Wow.
So 250,000 people is not any small number. A lot of people might think, it's just a few random people getting together and doing a protest. This was statewide. This was supported by everyone. And again, after now things had become a little bit more physical, there was no violence involved, but now they'd taken to the streets. This again still fell on deaf ears. So that was, Hanji, the Dharam Yudh Morcha was the level up in terms of being heard and resolutions being acknowledged.
And then building up from there, then getting to 1984, what other stuff was happening? Like, you can watch the speeches online of Sant Ji as well, Sanjay Singh Ji, and you can almost feel the atmosphere. I like Gurdwara Manji Sahib, and these kind of things happening. So, what was the next step then? What was that build up then to that day happening June the 1st?
So there's a few things happening. I guess you have the political side of it. The Dharam Yudh Morcha it's religious and political, but I guess in terms of the struggle. You have those things, but at the same time, you see a rejuvenation of Sikhi in Punjab, and you see figure heads like Sant Jarnail Singh Ji not only looking at things from a social, political view, but also bringing a lot of people back into Sikhi, as the Taksal did with the previous leaders as well. And this was also a thorn in the state of India, because one of the agendas of that time, if you like, and you can even argue today, is to suppress Sikh in their Sikhi. And because it's a threat, as governments of the past, whether it's the British, whether it's the Mughals, whether it's Ahmed Shah Abdali and the Afghans, they all realized that Sikhi is powerful and Sikhi is dangerous. in terms of fighting against the tyranny we are putting upon people. So they acknowledged this, and Sanjay Singh ji was a figurehead for doing prachar, and they travelled across all cities in India, promoting Sikhi, taking people off nashe, which is drugs, taking people away from alcohol, connecting people to Gurbani and Seva in the masses, in the thousands. And their speeches, you mentioned on top of the Langar Hall and sometimes in Manji Sahib around Harmandir Sahib, would attract thousands upon thousands of people. One of the parents from the Sikhi class actually mentioned on Saturday that she actually got to meet Jarnail Singh ji.
Wow.
And she went to one of the speeches, and it was really interesting. She was saying the traction that they had, people had so much faith in them, and also the good Sikh they were, anything they would say, people would listen to, and they would have full faith in. And it's really important to realize that they weren't a random leader that emerged. The reason they were so successful in revitalizing and rejuvenating Sikhi within Punjab was because of the kamai they had. They had earned Sikhi in that sense for 15, 20 years of hard seva and reading a lot of Gurbani, doing a lot of bhakti. And that allowed them to have the virtues to actually start this revolution and take it right to the front. And she was mentioning that people from all over the world had come to meet them. So it wasn't just a few people in Punjab, people from England, Canada, Australia, America, and people from all over India had come just to see them and listen to what they were saying, because they captured the hearts of the Punjab and they captured the hearts of Sikhs at that time. And they were the voice of the Pant at that point.
You know, not to go too much into Sant Ji Jeevani, because, you know, this is such a big topic. And hopefully we can do a podcast on them separately in the future.
Yeah.
But just like a few things that come to mind, which sound a bit so obvious but never clicked in my mind. This first thing is like we say Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, innit?
Yeah.
And we say like Sant Sapahi.
Yeah.
And like Sant Jarnail is more like, you know, what do you like? It's general.
A general Hanji or a warrior.
Like, so it's like their name, how we refer to them. It's like they've already got Sant Sapahi in their name. So I just kicked in my head. Some people think, duh. I
never thought about that either.
Yeah, so that's really crazy to think about. Even the name Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, how we say that, even though Sant is a title that's given afterwards, but it's really mind-blowing. Another thing is that we'll talk about this in the car on the way up. We were testing some people about like what was the capital city of Punjab, but like when they took birth as well was in 1947, right? And that's when the partition happened.
Yeah.
And that was, I think that's one of the biggest like amount of deaths that occurred in the world. I think 10 million people like were
mass migration,
and
yeah,
so
it was one of the biggest recorded.
Right? And you know, whenever something really big happens in the world, when there's like you know, such negativity, you know, there always has to be a balance.
Yep.
So Vaheguruji always sends, you know, I always quote this punkti, but it fits so well. Like, you know, Jab Jab Hot Arista Pada, Taba Taba Dehe, Tadat Avatara, Guru Gobind Singh Ji saying to us that whenever there's tyranny, then Vaheguruji always sends somebody to restore that balance and to help the saints, right? And help the people that are downtrodden. So it's almost as like at that time, 1947, at the same time, look who's come to earth to basically resolve that, right? And to bring the balance back. Because it all links back to the first question I asked you, is what you think about 1984, and you said revolution, right? Which is very powerful. So I just want to mention that about like Sant Ji as well.
And even in the previous podcast, Jeevan Singh mentioned Sant Attar Singh Ji coming, Sant Ishwar Singh Ji coming at these really interesting times in India, where Sikhi was on the downward trend, if you want.
Yeah.
So just echoing what you're saying, definitely Guru Sahib sends their bhagats or their certain avatars whenever the time requires of it. And even just the Sakhi comes to mind about this, actually, that captures this very well. So two leaders prior to Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was Sant Gurbachan Singh Ji. And if anyone's read their Jeevani, Pavitra Jeevan, is it?
The Gyan Kirna.
Gyan Kirna by Guru. You'll hear this Sakhi within there about the Shaheed Sarovar. So I believe they were at Chamkaur Sahib and they did 40 days of prayer, of jap. And after the 40 days, upon the hills around Chamkaur Sahib, a tunnel emerged. And they were curious and they followed the tunnel through. And as they followed the tunnel through, they emerged and they saw these massive trees and they saw these pools of water, sarovars, if you like, all around. And they were quite confused initially as to where they'd come. And as they approached closer and got out of that tunnel, if you like, they saw these human figures that were very, very big in stature. And as they examined them a bit closely, they realized these are Singhs. And after that, kind of getting an idea as to what's going on, one of the Singhs actually called them out by their name and said, Gurbachan Singh, come over here. And when starting a dialogue, they got closer and they saw these trees and there were shastar hanging off all of the trees. So weapons hanging off all the trees. And they got closer and they realized it was a Singh. It was a Singh in a Damala, in a Chola, flourished with Gurbans. And after asking them, who are you? Where have I come? They mentioned that I'm Bhai Taru Singh, I'm Bhai Mandeep Singh ji. These are all the Shaheeds of the Panth. And at that point, Sant Gurbachan Singh ji said, what are you guys doing? Why are you here? What's your purpose? And they simply said that we're waiting. And Sant Gurbachan Singh ji said, what are you waiting for? And they replied by saying, we're waiting for the hukum, we're waiting for the order from Waheguru or from Guru Gobind Singh ji to go back on earth wherever they send us. So we're so blessed in the sense that we have this whole army of souls that are waiting to come back. And who knows when Waheguru sends a specific one, right? And even just the other day, talking to you about it earlier, we realized that Sant Kartar Singh ji, who you mentioned earlier, was actually by Uday Singh ji in their past life, who was the general of the Panth and gave Shahidi at Sirsa Nadi. And when you hear these things, it really does inspire you. This is quite a gloomy topic, or can be quite a gloomy topic, where you think, you know what's going to happen to Sikhi? What's going to happen to Punjab? All these things. When you realize that who's pulling the strings of Sikhi, right? It's Guru Nanak Dev Ji. There's nothing that can overcome them.
And it gives you goosebumps. Like,
It really does.
It gives me goosebumps now. And I guess just obviously it's hard to put yourself in the shoes of those people at the time. But then you'd think that having such amazing souls around you, that no wonder why they were in Chadadikala. No wonder why they were pushing for this, because it can be hard. Even in other podcasts we talked about Sangat, but you got, because again, we can single out Sanjay Singh, but there were a lot of Guru Sikhs then, they had a lot
Countless.
of Kamai, right? Like the websites you got, I'll never forget 1984, and like they talk, you can read the Jeevanies of other Guru Sikhs, and hopefully you can go through some other names as well of Shaheed Singhs,
Hanji.
and their Kamai was just was on another level, right?
I think when we see those Guru Sikhs, we always see them at that end point of their life.
Hanji.
But then we don't realize it took a whole life of abhyas and kamai and so much like hard work and Gurbani part, and then they got to that point.
Hanji.
Like we think it's so fickle and so easy just to get Shahidi like that, but it's not really, because you have to be worthy of it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think also in our personal lives, one thing that came out to me is that you can overcome any obstacle with Gurbani, or with Sikhi, if you're Sikhi strong. They had the biggest obstacle of bullets coming their way, and they laughed back and fired back on her and howled it down. Our obstacles hopefully aren't that bad. But whatever, stress, jobs, money, family, seva, whatever it might be, these guys have epitomized Sikhi and showed us that whether it's bullets flying at you or any other problems, Guru Sahib has all the answers, Waheguru. And they've just re-emphasized what our history has taught us throughout. At any point in history, you'll see Guru Sikhs doing crazy things that the world will describe as impossible. But through the Kirpa of the Guru, as Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, the other Singhs, Bhai Mehnga Singh Ji, and all these other great Gurmukhs, they've shown time and time again that with Guru Sahib's hand upon our heads, anything's achievable. Even if that means fighting the state of India with crappy guns and a few hundred people, that's no problem.
100%. And Gurdwara Singh mentioned this in another podcast, right, about their spirit.
Yeah,
it was much bigger than the enemies, right? Even though their weapons were not as great, it was a spirit. And even just a punkti that comes to mind when you talked about the whole idea of Gurbani, and they laughed at the bullets, is like the Pehla Marna Kabul, Jeevan ki chhada aas, that they'd given up, they've accepted death, innit? They have no hope in life, right? Ho sabna ki rehne ka, to aao hamare paas. So they've become the dust of the feet of the other Guru Sikhs, right? And that's just, we can see that within their Jeevanis and the way they live their lives and how inspiring it is. So it gives a lot of hope, I'd say, as well, when you hear these kind of sakya. And that's what they had a lot of put the hopes and desires into Guru Sahib Ji, that you'd think that, whatever happens in life, they're going to keep sending these Guru Sikhs back. And, those are the ones that are going to, push things forward through Guru Sahib Ji's grace. And we just have to just make sure we're there to do a little part, right? Just, whatever little tiny part we can do to help push it along by 0.001%, if that, right? So where do you want to take this now, Vijay? Do you want to talk a bit more about some of the other Guru Sikhs, the other Shaheed Singhs, or do you want to go through the actual days? You let us know what you want to do now with this podcast.
Yeah, I think we can just give an overview as to what happened each day. So on the 1st of June, we see the first set of attacks happen. And also prior to that, within Amritsar as a city, we see all these restrictions. So there was a curfew. people were not allowed to leave their homes at a specific time or walk through the streets at a specific time. And you could also ask, why June? Why did this happen in June? And there's a few main factors, I believe, that provides a reason to this. One was because of the grain strikes that were meant to happen as part of the Dharam Yudh Morcha. So on the 1st of June, the farmers of Punjab had agreed to stop sending out grain to the rest of India. Now, even today, Punjab is referred to as the breadbasket of India, i.e. all the main food source is from Punjab. So on the 1st of June, they were going to, as part of that agitation, stop sending out grain to the rest of India, which would have given India a huge burden. So that's one thing to take into account. Also, you can argue that if they wanted to go in and flush out these militants, why did they choose one of the busiest days of the year in Harmandir Sahib? You know, within the early days of June, we commemorate the Shaheedi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji. And there were tens of thousands of members of Sangat that have come to Harmandir Sahib, especially for that. So it's important to understand the context. And also, it's important to understand that Sanjay Singh Ji had been arrested in 1982 and they were freed and there was nothing that was put on them. So these false accusations about these people trying to declare their own country, when you look at the grand scheme of things, none of it makes any sense.
Was there even an arrest warrant for Santaji?
So initially there was, but after they were freed because there was no charges that held up in court. So that was in 1982. And there were even army generals that said that, let me go in and speak with Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. But those people that offered a different solution to a full-scale attack were taken off the mission known as Operation Blue Star. So it's very interesting when you take everything into account. There's only one solution that comes out, and that is that this was a strike at the heart of Sikhi. So on the 1st of June, we see shots being fired, and we see the first Shaheed by Mehnga Singh Ji Babbar, also known as Kulwant Singh. And even his Shaheedi, he was on the tower of Babbar Atallarai, which is a Gurdwara at the back of Harmandir Sahib, 8 stories high. And they started returning fire. And he was shot in his forehead. And there's a very famous Sakhi about his Shaheedi. When he's shot in his forehead, he's reading Sukhmani Sahib, and only after finishing the Sukhmani Sahib part, he gives a Shaheedi. Right. And before giving his last breath, the Gurmukhs ask, Bhai Sahib, how are you? And he smiles and he says, I'm in Chardi Kala. Even though he's got a bullet between his eyes, he said, I'm absolutely fine. I'm in high spirits. And after that, he gives his Shaheedi. So we see Singh start becoming Shaheed from the 1st of June. And then we start seeing the retaliation from the Gurmukhs a few days later. So the army shot for 2 days outside before they actually entered. We had artillery, we had cannon fire coming in from all sides of Harmandir Sahib. And we see this stern resolve from the Sikhs, the Singhs at the time, who kept faith in Waheguru and welcomed it, and were not scared in any way, shape or form.
And just to clarify, this was continuous, like a barrage of continuous fire, right? For hours on end.
Hanji. Yeah, so non-stop for 2 or 3 days. And we get to the 3rd of June, which was actually the day of, or in that year, the day that Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shaheedi was commemorated. And at that point, people around Harmandir Sahib had started coming to protest. And when they came, thousands of people were trapped in Harmandir Sahib. A lot of people were allowed into Amritsar. Even the trains, the coaches were allowing people in, but there was no exit. And even within Harmandir Sahib, people were allowed in, but no one was allowed to leave. So it's as if they were bottlenecking all the Sangat within Harmandir Sahib in order to try and cause as much destruction as possible. And it's important that we look at other sources, not just Sikhs. And on the 3rd of June, we have Amia Rao, who was a reporter for the Citizens of Democracy. And she says that innocent people were slaughtered like rats, first letting them into the complex, then declaring a curfew, which prevented them from getting out. And then thousands were caught unaware. And then finally, when the survivors were asked to surrender, they were shot in cold blood. So the amount of references, I could sit here and literally just read off screens, the amount of people that have eyewitness accounts, Sikh and Non-Sikh, the amount of investigations, and the amount of people that have looked into this from a non-Sikh background, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that this was murder in cold blood, and there's no two ways about it. And then we even see Brahma Kelani of the Associated Press of India at that time. She herself witnessed 13 people killed, and she said that the stars were used to actually tie people's hands behind their back. And then she said that 200 army men were actually killed by the Singhs. So there was a very, very strong resistance. And she herself was charged with sedition, i.e. planning conspiracy against the Indian state. And she was not allowed to tell her full story. So straight away, we have the Indian state suppressing who can come in. Those people that were trying to report were given grief, attacked, and even killed. And then we see the Sangat totally unaware being trapped and being killed in cold blood. But in a very Jadidi sense, we see the Singhs fighting back and not letting anyone get close to the best of their ability.
And, you know, just to put this into context of maybe something that other people would understand, it's like kind of like a Hitler's type regime where they're controlling all the media, propaganda.
Hanji.
They're literally murdering people. Like, is there any other ways you could maybe...
No, just furthering that, I'd say the reason is their identity. Just the Jewish people were massacred in World War II and prior to that. In the same way, Sikhs were being targeted for one, their thought process, for the demands of basic human rights and social economical rights, and being punished for standing up for their own needs. So I would even argue that for a Sikh not to know about 1984, that's the equivalent of a Jewish person not knowing about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And it's when you put it like that, it is obviously, in terms of numbers, the Holocaust was much more. But in terms of what happened and how it happened and the reasoning behind it, I would say they're very, very similar. You have a dictator, power-hungry, Hitler, Indira Gandhi, finding a scapegoat, the Jewish people, or...
And they polarized all the people, right?
Yeah.
Like, which is something happening even now, today.
Yeah.
In the whole world, you're getting mass polarization between like the far right or far left or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse and worse, right? So it feels like it's getting to another like boiling point.
Yeah, it definitely is. And when all you're being supplied with in terms of information is negative against Sikh, then the rhetoric will be that. And that's why it's important to take propaganda with a pinch of salt and make sure you do your independent work. But we're very blessed now that we've got so many articles, so many eyewitness accounts to show that what was propagated in 1984 was quite the contrary to what actually happened. So then we go on to June the 4th, and there's reports of at least 20,000 members of Sangat that were trapped in the complex. And on the 4th of June, the electricity in the water is cut off. And that's been done, one, to make the living conditions for the Singhs fighting in Harmandir Sahib very hard, but also for the members of Sangat to suffer as well. And at the 4 a.m., we have the army start shelling at Al Takht. And Giani Pav Singh, who was one of the main grantees at Harmandir Sahib at that time, hears this themselves. And this barrage continues until the 6th of June.
So just to add to that, this is Amrit Villa, right? When all the Gursikhs are doing their like part and meditation and prayers, they're sitting there peacefully, and then the army chose to attack at that point. So it's a very like a dirty tactic on their side, right? It
is, and fighting even within battles. I guess you have rules of engagement. All of that went out the window. Depriving people of water is simply inhumane, especially when they know there's only probably 200-300 people that are fighting back, but there's 20,000 people, children, women, elderly, that are stuck in June, which is one of the hottest months in India, being deprived of that water. Many of them perished just because of the lack of hydration. And we hear reports of Indian soldiers telling women, telling children to drink their own urine if they're thirsty. So this is the state. And also, if you have Indian soldiers speaking like that, it's quite clear what their commands would have been as well. Because a soldier doesn't just go out of their way to say those kind of things or act in that kind of way. That's come from a higher chain of command, and that's come with intent. So yeah, we even hear of Kirtanis that continued their seva. One that comes to mind is Bhai Singh, who was 65 years old and he was blind, and he was shot as he was leaving Harmandir Sahib. How can you justify that? A blind Kirtani leaving his duty was shot in cold blood whilst leaving Harmandir Sahib. And I guess there's no evidence to suggest that there was any shooting, any retaliation from the actual Harmandir Sahib complex. Obviously, around the complex, you have Singh stationed, but there wasn't anyone in Harmandir Sahib fighting or shooting. So the question asked is, why was there shots towards Harmandir Sahib at that point? And the evidence we have for that is even one of the Sarups of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, around Sukhmani Sahib in the first 200 angs, I believe, a bullet was pierced. So there's plenty of evidence to suggest that this was a full-scale attack to just cause as much destruction as possible without any real justification. And also we start to see now at midday on the June the 4th, around 30,000 villagers across Punjab start to gather after hearing about what's happened at Amritsar. And we have generals like General Sundarji who authorized deadly fire to disperse these people. And out of those, even 100 of those became Shaheed.
And so we also have to remember at that point in Punjab, there was no media like that was getting out to all the people in the bins, right?
Yeah.
It was just passed by word of mouth.
Yeah.
So all of that, like when people say, "Oh, why didn't people come and to Darbar Sahib after?"
Yeah.
They didn't know. There was no information getting out because there was a what do you call it? Media blackout.
It's interesting because with the whole Ukraine war, and a lot of us thought, "Oh, this is going to be the first war that's on social media." But how many clips have we actually seen of the war? I haven't really seen anything. So even with the power of social media now, look how suppressed things are.
Yeah.
So imagine back then when no one had a smartphone, how hard it would have been to access information. That would have taken days to trickle down.
Yeah.
And just addressing one of the misconceptions as we go along, a lot of people say, "Oh, the Sikhs had a chance to surrender." And General Sundarji, who is one of the main leads of Operation Blue Star, he quotes that we went inside with humility in our hearts and prayers on our lips. And it's really important that we realize that that was not the case. I've got a screen full of quotes I can rattle off, but one that comes to mind is again from the Citizens for Democracy, a report to the nation talked about an operation in Punjab that was published in 1985. And the author writes that no one inside the Golden Temple had yet realized the sinister plan of the authorities. Punjab had been sealed. Amritsar had been sealed. The Golden Temple had been sealed. Thousands of pilgrims and hundreds of Akali workers had been allowed to collect inside the temple complex. They have been given no inkling or warning either of the sudden curfew or the imminent army attack. It was to be a black hole type of tragedy, not out of forgetfulness, but out of deliberate planning and design. There's plenty of other ones as well. The Guardian even reports it in 1984 that the Sikhs were shot at point blank range, their hands tied behind their backs with turbans. It was a virtual massacre. So I'm not going to spend all day talking about these things because they're easily accessible online. But it's important to realize that we're not just these things are readily available. So just carrying on, I guess. So on June the 5th, this was the last full day where the daily routine, the Martyred Harmandir Sahib, was remained intact. After that, the bombing continues throughout Harmandir Sahib, and now fires also start to spread. On the Sesri, if you see the face of Akal Takht, we see that distraught picture where the face has just been obliterated. But we still see the Sikh resistance continue, and it's now concentrated on the Langar Hall, on top of the Langar Hall, and Akal Takht. And we see great Gurmukhs like Bhai Mandeep Singh ji, who is the head of the All India Sikh Student Federation, also stationed there and leading the battle. And what's really interesting is Sanjay Singh ji also does an ardas as well for the battle. So keeping Gurbani in the midst of all of this and realizing that was their source of power. One really important thing to realize on June the 5th is that 7 p.m., 40 other Gurdwara in Punjab were attacked. Now, how do you explain that? How do you explain 40 other Gurdwara in Punjab being attacked simultaneously with no apparent reason?
When people say, "Oh, they could have just moved out from Darbar Sahib," why did it have to be there? But why did these 40 other Gurdwara get attacked then?
There's simply no other reason except for to suppress the Sikhs and to cause as much pain within Punjab at that point. And by 9 p.m. on June the 5th, there's a total blackout in Punjab. Electricity is cut off to everyone. Charities, non-government organizations, and all of these other independent people were not allowed to report on anything. What we hear of very interesting stories as well in terms of the resistance is that quite often, at this point, the army was struggling to get into Harmandir Sahib because of the resistance. And you have to realize these things didn't have crazy artillery. They didn't have rocket launchers or any of these things. They had Sten guns and anything they could buy cheap off the market, right? So the fact that they're putting this resistance against the might of the Indian army, over 70,000 members of the Indian army were brought into Amritsar over these few days, was incredible.
And they sent the elite commandos, right? These are guys who we would say like the SAS is the elite British forces.
I'm just about to talk about that. So at that point, led by Bhai Mandeep Singh ji, they sent this contingent of commandos back from the Langar Hall. So on June the 5th at 10 o'clock at night, the commandos actually trying to take Akal Takht and they actually dive in through the Sarovar, and they were sent back after 2 waves. So a wave of them came, sent back, another wave of them came, sent back, and after that, the cowards of the army had no other option but to bring in tanks and 12 heavily armored vehicles. And this was first towards Akal Takht, and the domes were destroyed. And within Akal Takht, the Sarups and a lot of our history also were destroyed in the meantime as well. And I think they also relocated a lot of them as well. So obviously realizing that things aren't getting any better, precautions were taken to try and preserve a lot of things. But what we'll see as we come later on in the day is that there's a specific tack actually on our history and the Sikh reference library that over the 8th and 9th of June, once everything was kind of fizzled down in that sense, these things were set alight on purpose, which again begs the question, the fighting's apparently over, so why is this being burnt? And why is the blame being shifted on other people when there's evidence to suggest that it was deliberately done? So on June the 6th,
this is after they supposedly got rid of the leader of the Sikhs, Sant denouncing, right? They say this is after that day.
Yeah, so this is on June between the 7th and the 9th, where the kind of cleanup operation starts, if you like, and the looting of the what we call the Tosha Khana, the trying to think of the best way of
treasury,
the treasury of Harmandir Sahib, the Sikh reference library, all being looted, and then the rest being burnt alive. We see that over 103 historical paintings were taken, also 20,000 rare historical documents, a canopy from Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji's time. All of these things were taken, and even the golaks were emptied at Harmandir Sahib. That's the extent they went to try and
these are like priceless artifacts. Like if we were to say we go to Vatican and their archives and their like most precious things, right? This is literally what the government have come and wiped out for the Sikhs.
Yeah, and this was very organized as well. It wasn't, army soldiers would not have been given free rein to just go and explore where they wanted. These were specifically targeted areas where they were going to, if you take a community's history, that's one of the foundation stones of their spirit. And it's always said that if you want to destroy a community, destroy their history first. And we've not only seen that in 1984, we've seen that from the British, we've seen that from the Mughals times. And that's something that we'll always continue to do because our history is so rich and flourishes. And it's something that we take a lot of inspiration from as well. Hanji, so then as the fighting starts to fizzle down, now a lot of these things have become shaheed. We also, one family I want to talk about in particular, many of you may have seen this picture of two young girls, Bibi Satnam Kaur, Bibi Waheguru Kaur, and again just talking about the spirit of the Sikhs at that time. So Giani Morcha Singh, who was a great Gurmukh, and Bibi Pritam Kaur and their two daughters were at Harmandir Sahib and quite often were running errands for the Sikhs that were fighting, bringing them langar, prashada or pani or ammunition. And he initially was actually of a Brahmin background, and when he met Sant Kartar Singh Ji, he came into Sikhi, and his daughter, he had three daughters, Satnam Kaur, Waheguru Kaur, and Ajit Pal being the youngest, who wasn't there at the time. And they spent a lot of time with Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, and they were there. They were by a bunker right next to the area where Baba Deep Singh Ji's
Asthan is
that place where that commemorates Baba Deep Singh Ji's coming. And when the tanks enter after that third wave of commandos failed, the tanks enter and Bibi Satnam Kaur, Bibi Waheguru Kaur actually speak with their parents, and their parents and the family have this decision that we are now going to give our last breaths trying to defend Harmandir Sahib, and they take it upon themselves to try and take these tanks and stop them getting as far as possible. So you have Giani Morcha Singh, Bibi Pritam Kaur, and their two daughters, who were aged 8 and 6, strap themselves with grenades and run as close as they can to the tanks. And by blowing themselves up, take those tanks and stop them in their paths.
Right.
And this is a mother and father not only sacrificing themselves, but their children. Now, someone might question, that's inhumane. Why would you sacrifice your 6-year-old and your 8-year-old child? But it shows that their parents had so much love for Sikhi and valued Sikhi so much that they realized the value of giving their children in such a way, of the data that is Shaheed. Being a martyr in the house of Guru Nanak Dev Ji is a huge blessing and something that we need to normalize.
And people that would question that, then you could also point a finger at the Sahibs out there as well, then, right?
Perfect example, right? You could say, why did Mata Gujari Ji allow that to happen?
Yeah.
Or why did Guru Gobind Singh Ji send their own sons at the age of 18 and 16, I believe, or something similar to that, into battle, and not just said, oh, go and do it, but pumped them and said, go and show the world how you fight. And said to Baba Ajit Singh Ji, show the world what your name means. Ajit means the one that cannot be defeated. So it wasn't that, it's like Guru Gobind Singh Ji led by the front. So it's a very, very valid point.
Even the shortest Sahibs are they? What were their ages?
5 and 7, I believe.
Yeah, roughly.
And they, shook the darbar of the Mughals at that point. And Bibi Sataram Kaur, Bibi Wari Guru of a very similar age, showing that age doesn't restrict. Wherever Guru Sahib does Kirpa, we can achieve amazing, amazing things, especially in defense of Sikhi as well. Hanji. And then, just rounding off, we see now the army start to come in and garbage trucks are brought in on June the 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th. And also we see these bodies now, this cleanup operation where people are trying to collect these bodies in garbage trucks, and there's mass sanskars, mass burnings of bodies happening to try and get rid of all the evidence in essence. And over the 9th and 10th of June, we see the last fighters attain the Shahidi. And you can kind of say by the 10th of June, the complex was fully under Indian occupation. And the keys were only actually returned to the Sikhs on the 1st of October after protests from Sikhs all over India at that point. And the last recorded Shaheed was by Major Singh Ji Naguke, who was a great Gurmukh as well. And he was famous actually for bringing justice to the Panth by killing the Gurbachan, who is the Nirankali cult leader that we mentioned in 1978, who was actually leading all of that Beadabi. So these great Gurmukhs weren't just there in the midst of it. They'd done the Kamaya Ji mentioned and also played an active role in the Panth many, many years prior to that as well. Very, very important to bear that in mind as well. And we see great Gurmukhs like them attain Shahidi in those last final days. We also see great Gurmukhs such as Bibi Upkar Kaur, who was the president of the women's wing of the All India Sikh Student Federation. And it's said that she fired so many shots with her gun that her shoulder actually came out of place.
Wow.
And so it's important for the BBR. Obviously, BBR have a very important role in terms of Langar Seva and all the rest of it. But there's also a place on the battlefield as well. No matter how old you are, no matter how young you are as well. And we also see Bibi Paramjit Kaur, who's a sister of the Bibi Amarjit Kaur, who's the wife of Bhai Fauja Singh Ji. She became Shaheed whilst protecting a Sarup of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, so that the bullet wouldn't hit Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji and hit her body instead. We hear these are 2 or 3 accounts, and there are countless of individual personalities and the crazy, amazing things they did in these few days.
And we can read all these Jeevani's, right? So do you...
Hanji, there's a book that I believe the NSYF, it might be 1984 tribute. It's called Sikh Martyrs. And it goes through a lot of martyrs that took a lot of people that became Shaheed in 1984 and also after that as well in the movement for the freedom of Punjab and the Kargular as it's called as well. Hanji. So there's countless that we can read about. So I'd urge anyone to check out the NSYF channel, check out the 1984 tribute website and also the Never Forget 1984
Even
website.
Is there a book by Carl Publishers, Game of Love?
Yeah, he's done 2 actually in 1984. One's Reflection of 1984 and also Game of Love. And also Giani Kirpal Singh Ji's eyewitness accounts. There's a book by Mark Tully and Satish Jacob, which is an independent narrative as to what happened. The books, I think Basis of Sikhi, I've done last year in June, I published loads of books that I've read on it. So you can check out that post, or maybe you can put a picture of it in the podcast, however works. Those are great books just to start off with. That'll get you going, Kanji.
So what would you say now that happened after those 10 days, like June 10th, June 11th? Would you skip straight to November that year, or what would you want to cover anything in between that time as well, G?
Yeah, so I think there was just general outrage across the Panth. And as you mentioned, protests throughout India, and out of absolute outrage for what had taken place. A lot of people were hurting, a lot of people lost loved ones, a lot of people realized that a lot of their Singhs had become Shaheed. And this culminates into October 31st, where Satwan Singh and Beyant Singh took it upon themselves to avenge this and shot Indira Gandhi on Halloween in that sense, in that year, which also then started the Delhi riots in November and the Kalukara in Delhi, where Sikhs again were massacred and targeted throughout Delhi and also in Punjab, looted, shops, houses burned, women raped, and started the second round of violence within 1984, if you like. But it's interesting because I think there's a statistic. I can't remember exactly how many days. It's something like 183 days. Within 183 days of anyone attacking Harmandir Sahib, they've died. Whether it's Ahmed Shah Abdali, whether it was any of the Mughals, whether it was the British, whether it was Indira Gandhi in this sense. Anyone that's dared to attack Harmandir Sahib has always found the same fate. And that was how it was with Indira Gandhi as well. And then November 1984 is a whole other podcast in itself as well, I guess.
Definitely. And even just when it comes to Akal Takht Sahib as well, because like you said, obviously the whole complex in itself, but especially Akal Takht Sahib was smashed to pieces in one respect, right? With the shelling and stuff.
Hanji.
And even when they started to rebuild Akal Takht Sahib, I remember meeting a Guru Sikh who passed away a few years ago, and they talked about how they did save of rebuilding Akal Takht Sahib. But even then, they would be picked on by the Indian government as well. And he was actually imprisoned, and they used their torture tactics and stuff like that. They actually split his legs.
Wow.
And stuff. So it wasn't just then, right? It wasn't just June. Even before November, whenever the dates were, people were still being, singled out and still being tortured and attacked.
Yeah.
For having the identity and, like you said, the morals and the principles that Sikhs had, right?
Yeah, and this was just the beginning of the next 8-9 years, I guess, up until 1993, 1994, where we have many, many more operations. There was Operation Woodrose, where over 8,000 people went missing up to the time in October 1984, excuse me. Again, which was targeting Sikhs, anyone that posed to be a threat to the Indian state, basically an excuse to attack and pick up any innocent Sikhs. And then we have things that are more sinister, like Operation Shuddhikaran, and this is quite disgusting in its own way, because Shuddhi means to purify. Karan means to purify something. So the state, or the Punjab police, however you want to describe it, actually had an operation which meant to purify the Sikhs. And their operation was to try and rape as many Sikh women as possible so that we can, I guess, infiltrate their bloodline so that the Sikhs can no longer be born as pure Sikhs. And in a very sad attempt to try and take Sikhi away and to diverge that next generation of Sikh. And over the next few years, we find over 250,000 Sikhs killed up until 1992 in these various operations, in these fake encounters. And also in 1986, which is really important, 2 years after, we find the Panth come together, led by Panj Sikh at Akal Takht, where again over 200,000 Sikhs came to Akal Takht to declare that now we are fighting for our own homeland, Khalistan. So 2 years after the attack in 1984, the Panth came together and put a formal declaration to say that we are not safe here. We are now going to fight and do everything in our means to try and get our own homeland, however that might be, whatever that might have looked like.
And sorry, just one more thing came to mind. Darbar Sahib was attacked again, right? And was it Operation Black Thunder? Yeah,
Black Thunder, Hanji. So there were all these fake premises where there's ex-terrorist in Harmandir Sahib, or there's ex-militant in Harmandir Sahib. And it wasn't just 1984 in June. These attacks happened for the next 10, 15 years. And now the attacks continue. It's just now they're not using guns.
It's taken a different form.
It's gone underground. The attacks are on our farmers' prices. The attacks are on our Punjabi. The attacks are on our land and the geography we have. The attack is on our water, so our crops don't come out good.
So when people talk about this concept of like Khalistan and all this, it's become a very big taboo topic, as you know, right?
Yeah.
But this is like after years and years and decades, you could say, of agitation and our demands not falling on deaf ears, basically.
Panji.
It leads to a point where you can't take anymore. So people have to demand their own rights, and they have to take it in a sense, right?
Yeah, I guess. Well, if you've tried since 1947, after giving 70% of the lives for a country, to then be found in a country that doesn't recognize you for who you are, that doesn't treat you equally, but rather bullies you and attacks you independently, then after 50 years of that, and still realizing that this state, this country that we've made, or we've had a huge part in sponsoring, then decides and feels that they can attack our most holy place, and then for another 10 years attacks and picks up your youth and rapes your women and attacks your identity and attacks your history, if all of that doesn't culminate into you realizing that you're not safe here and there needs to be another way, then I'm not sure what will. And there's nothing left. Now, what that answer is, whether it's Khalistan or something else, I don't know. But for me, all I know is that we're not safe in Punjab, and our history has shown it, and it still continues to show it. There are biadabis that happen of Guru Granth Sahib Ji constantly. The Kisan Morcha, All of these things are just reminders constantly that it's not right and it's not sustainable, and something will need to be done at some point. The answers for that I don't have.
But say on an individual level, what can we do, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think when you come into Sikhi, and I came to Sikhi, it's quite overwhelming and quite saddening. You just see all these bad things, like, Sikhs are getting converted in Punjab. There's more alcohol shops than there are schools in Punjab. 1 in 3 youth in Punjab are addicted to nashe. Like, what's going on? You just feel like attacks coming left, right, and center.
The
right?
water levels is
the water level. NASA has predicted that Punjab will be a desert by 2050. I think it's important to always reference Gurbani. And within Gurbani, Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj says that Abchal Neev Tari Guru Nanak Nit Nit Chadai Savai. It's important to realize that that's the land of our gurus. That's where God decided, I'm going to create this band that will revolutionize this world. And there's no force on earth that can stop that. Even though it might look like nothing's going our way. If you look at our history, we got to a point in the 1700s, 1730s, 1740s, where there was about 20,000 Sikhs left, and they were eating tree bark. But then they came back within 50 years to actually take control of Punjab. So within a generation, anything can happen. In essence, it's all when Guru Sahib does kirpa. But we as Sikhs have to put our own effort in. Guru Sahib will do kirpa on those that put effort in. So on an individual level, I think the first thing is just education. Learning about what's happening, because that's a huge task in itself. And so how can you learn about what's happening? Follow people that are investigating these things. Saving Punjab is one of the best ways. It's an organization, a think tank, that are conducting research on Punjab and looking at the ways that we can actually start overcoming a lot of these problems. So Saving Punjab, I definitely recommend you follow them on Instagram and Facebook, and start reading listen to the eyewitness accounts. When you go to Punjab, ask your Pindus. It's quite interesting, actually. I spoke to my chacha, mata, my cousin. They're all farmers, and they have kheti bari in India. I went 2 months ago, and they were just telling me about the other options there are in farming. So now it's very big on wheat. Punjab produces a lot of wheat, but before it wasn't wheat. It was cotton and all these other things that didn't require so much water.
And rice.
Rice
is a very big detriment to the soil and stuff, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting to realize, where did this come? This is only a 20, 30 year thing. In the 1970s, led by Indira Gandhi, the Green Revolution took place, where seeds were imported from Mexico and all these other countries, because Punjab traditionally didn't farm the things it does now.
Yep.
And that put such a huge drain on water. So there's no reason why we can't start farming those other things. There are alternatives, but I guess it's very hard to change the culture very, very quickly.
Even like things like palm trees, where we go in Punjab, that's not native to Punjab. And palm trees are known to drink a lot of water. So even that, the plants that have been brought into Punjab is all to basically drain it and to dry it out.
So I think there are definitely things we can do locally, but I think it's just having a chat with locals in Punjab, seeing what's happening on the ground. I learned so much. There are alternative solutions. Obviously, it will take effort, money, and time, and above all, Guru's kirpa to overcome those things. But the first way of resolving a problem is to learn about it. And there are plenty of ways you can learn about it. Then I think it's important to see what you can do locally. If you're living in the diaspora, raise awareness on these things. And, if you have an option to go to Punjab or go to Dubai, go to Punjab and see what you can do. We're very blessed to actually do seva with kids in Punjab and run a Gurmat camp there. And this was one thing that really blew my mind, and realized that nothing can touch Punjab. Punjab is never going anywhere, and Punjab will flourish no matter what anyone tries to do. So we run a camp there with Lions MMA, which is an organization that run it, along with the SGPC. I'll talk about the SGPC in a second as well, actually. It's quite interesting. But there's over 1,000 kids that come there, and a lot of them have no knowledge on Sikhi. Like, they know Japji Sahib, they've heard of Japji Sahib, and that's it. If you ask them what Savaiye were, they had no idea. But the Sharda, the faith they had in Sikhi, and the love they have for Sikhi is unparalleled, even though they don't have no clue about it. And just by speaking to them, and as they learn a little bit, it means a lot for them. So in my eyes, to have change in Punjab, the youth are ready for it. But they just need direction, they need the tools.
even when we went recently, I felt it's not all doom and gloom, because we met so much youth that were like involved in so much, not only like the Santhya side or whatever like that, in conservation side, in heritage side, in like Kirtan, in so many different areas of Sikhi.
Yeah.
So it's like there is hope, right? There's always hope.
There's definitely hope. And I'll just give you an example. So we did one this year, and before COVID, we did one as well. And there was a competition to see how many Baniya the kids had gone off by heart, how many prayers they had off by heart. And this 11-year-old girl, I remember her name was Komal Preet Kaur, she won it. So that the Singh Sahib from Anandpur Sahib came and judged it. You guys want to have a guess how many Baniya she knew off by heart?
31.
31?
24?
32.
Wow.
She's 11 years old.
Wow.
I couldn't probably even name 32 Baniya to you, Hana. She had Sukhmani Sahib, all these other things off by heart. Asa Divar. How do you explain an 11-year-old girl having these things off by heart? Hana? And when I saw that, I was like, you know what? No, Punjab's not going anywhere. Sikhi's not going anywhere as well. Hana? It's really important. But you only get that honsla, that inspiration when you go and you meet these people, you get on the ground. Obviously, there's a lot to do in Punjab. There's a huge amount to do. But it's important you engage with Punjab, because then you see the little glimpses of hope, and that's what keeps you going.
100%.
Especially when you read about this stuff, which is very heavy and hard to digest.
Well, one thing just came to mind when we went to the library in the Darbar Sahib Parkarma.
Yeah.
And we met the artist there who was doing the portraits.
Oh.
And he's very, very talented artist. Yeah, he's got very amazing paintings. And we were just speaking to him. He's a young guy. And we were like, so we were saying, how much do you earn here? And he was saying, I barely earn enough. He earns like maybe 60 pounds a month or something.
Wow.
Which is literally nothing in ours, when we relate it to pounds, right?
Yeah.
But he said, I'm doing this out of my prem, out of my love for Sikhi. So that tells you that it doesn't matter. Even if you could say SGPC, whatever, have not treated him correctly, he doesn't care. He's still going to do that seva.
100%. And that's someone deprived of funding. Imagine we had funding.
Exactly.
Imagine what it could become. And I know I've spoken to a few Gurmukhs that are thinking about how do we create an independent economy in Punjab and all these things. We have a lot of money in the Pant. And there's no reason why we can go back and start investing these things ourselves, because quite frankly, the government's not going to do it for us. You know? So that might be the next steps in terms of getting Punjab to where it needs to be. And if you look at the times of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji, Punjab was the place to be. That was a place where science were flourishing, the arts were flourishing. We kind of had our Renaissance period, and people from all over the world would travel to Punjab. And that happened within the space of 30, 40 years. So it doesn't take long, but then it can also fall very quickly as well. But we've got enough evidence to show what the potential is. And it's interesting also, when I said to my cousin, he was talking about water levels. Basically, the deeper you go, the more hazardous the water becomes, right? And the more expensive it comes to pump it out, because you need bigger draining. And I asked him, so I was like, it was quite deep where the water levels were, is a couple 100 feet. And I said to him, what's the next step? Aren't you worried? And this is my cousin who is depending on farming in India. He has no other options. He can't go abroad. And he just said to me, he goes, Rab ne kar lena sara kuch. He's looked at me, he goes, don't worry, God will sort it. I'm more worried than he is. And we see that from Guru Sahib's time as well. Guru Amar Das Ji Maharaj, jithe lord pave, they'll put rainfall. So it's jithe, wherever there's Sikhi, whether it's social problems, economic problems, religious problems.
Just on that, Punjab means literally land of 5 rivers, right? But how many rivers are left?
Just about 3, I think, that cut through. They're not even in their entirety, right?
Exactly.
Also, something that the viewers, if you are interested in this line of thought, if you want to know more about how the landscape of Punjab and also the policies that have affected Punjab, you should watch this documentary. It's called The Last Stand or The Last Battle. I can't remember. Do you remember, Babban Singh, what it's called? I think it's The Last Stand. And it's a great documentary that talks about how the water policies and how the state has affected all of these things to lead Punjab where it is now socially. So we'll put a link for it in the description. It's an hour long, but in terms of the facts and details, it's priceless. And it'll give you a great understanding as to how have things become so hard for Punjab socially and economically in the past 40 years.
Did you want to mention something about SGPC? You were saying you want to say something.
Oh yeah, so the camp we organize is with the SGPC. So for anyone that doesn't know who that is, that's the governing body for the Gurdwaras in Punjab, the Shiromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee. And a lot of people have a lot of bad stigma about them, and rightfully so. I guess there's a lot more that needs to be done. But when we were talking to the people that work for the SGPC, a lot of them are really nice guys.
Yeah,
and they're the ones that helped us organize this camp. They're people. They're Sikh like us. They may not have the same direction as us, but you have to realize they're in a very vicious circle.
Yeah.
Where it's very disheartening because when someone tries to do something, they're suppressed. But when they're given the chance, a lot of them have a lot of love for Sikhi.
And if they speak out, they're very easily...
Their job's gone, right?
They're gone.
Their job's gone.
Their whole livelihood's gone.
Yeah, so just because they're not as vocal as we are, because we can sit here and say whatever we want in England, right? It's very important that we take things with a bit of context and not just say, oh, SGPC or Maria, they don't do anything. When you go there and speak to the people, they have a lot of love and they have a lot of plans for Sikhi as well. It's just that we have slightly different opportunities. And I believe when the time comes, they'll grasp it as well.
100%. And I just remember now again, we met recently one of the engineers at Darbar Sahib, like a very young guy, a very educated guy, and he's working on the Ramgariya Bunga.
Oh, wow.
And so he's been working on like the restoration of it. And he's like, we have all these plans to like restore it to how it was before and make like a museum here, teach people about the Sikh Missal period.
Yeah.
All this amazing stuff, right? So he's trying to do this all off his own back as a young engineer in Darbar Sahib.
Anji. So I think just in summary, as I mentioned, this is such an important part. And it's quite funny actually that the Indian Army tried to wipe out Sikhi. But look at us speaking about it now. One of the main things that got me into Sikhi was learning about 1984. So they probably did more good than damage because of the opportunity for all these people to come Shaheed and have these stories that we now read about and our children will read about. So many people came into Sikhi.
Yeah.
So it's quite funny how Guru Sahib's hukam works, right? A lot of people might say, oh, thousands of people were killed. And obviously that's a very bad thing. But if you look at the bigger picture, that created a catalyst for people to wake up and also to be inspired.
To millions and millions. And literally, if we consider the alternative, if no one stood up and did nothing, then I remember in one of Sant Jarnail Singh's speeches, he said that if like people say murder is bad, but then if we see something bad happening and we don't do anything to fight against it, then that's even worse. That's 100%. A bigger pop.
Yeah, it is.
So who knows what could have happened if they didn't stand up.
Anji. And we wouldn't be here speaking about them today. Huh?
And you talk about inspiration, and was that, I guess, when it comes to 1984, was that a big turning point in your life then as well when it comes to your Sikhi?
Yeah, the biggest, I'd say. I think I heard about like, and you grew up going to the Gurdwara, seeing like pictures of Bhai Mandeep Singh with their cease in their hand. And I guess things that you can't relate to straight away. But with this stuff, there's videos, there's pictures, there's eyewitness accounts. You can hear Sant Jarnail Singh's videos. You can see pictures of Bhai Fauja Singh. So the evidence was a bit more closer to home. And I realized that the things people were doing 300 years ago, people did it 30 years ago, and it's real. And people gave their lives and their children's lives for this. So there must be something behind it.
Like I said, closer to home, because it's going to be nearly 40 years in a few years, right? So it's not that long ago. So it definitely hits a bit harder, right? Because it's only just like a generation ago,
literally,
our parents' generation. And like I said, a lot of people you can meet today are eyewitnesses to that happening as well. And just moving forward then, G, what is the future then? So, now we're sitting in 2022. It's going to be 40 years. What do you see or what do you think the future is when it comes to 1984? This whole thing talk about justice and these things going forward, education. What do you think it is, VG?
I think there's no point asking justice from the people that perpetrated the crime in the first place. And we've gone to the UN. I actually went to Geneva before I kept my guess. There's a funny picture of me and a Ramal in this orange t-shirt in Geneva outside the UN headquarters, right, where we got over 1 million signatures and all that money and effort was spent, and nothing happened as a result. And if we get an apology, then what, right? We're not going to get reparations until there's someone of a Sikh stature, someone in the Panthic Soch in power. And I can't see that happening anytime soon. So I guess my final comments would be to not rely on anyone and not to trust anyone except for the Guru and the Pant. If we want any answers, quite often, it's said that Raj isn't given, kingdoms aren't given, they're taken. Whatever that might mean for us, I don't know. But I realized that by knocking on the door and handing some paperwork over, no one's going to give us what we're asking for. They'll just keep taking. So going forward, I think that's the way we need to view things with.
And what's happening now then? What are the, there's a lot of great Go to Sikhs initiatives and organizations doing a lot of great seva right now. So what is happening? What can people do and what can they get involved in to help support this movement or just to educate themselves, or just someone might be sitting there learning on this stuff now thinking, I want to learn more, I want to do more. So what would you say for that?
Yeah, so I think obviously Basics have got a channel, a playlist, the 1984 playlist. Bhai Mandeep Singh has done a lot. Das, myself, I've done a few talks on it as well. So those are the first things you can engage with. Also, the books mentioned, we'll put a book list out in the description if that's okay.
100%.
The books you can order off Amazon. Also, channels like NSYF, National Sikh Youth Federation, do a lot of work on 1984, and also the concept of Khalistan. So if you're interested in what Khalistan means or where the idea originates from, you could check them out. And also for anyone that's interested, there's a new documentary that's come out by the NSYF that they talked about 1984. And got everything, you've seen that, right? So you just want to plug that a little bit?
Yeah, I just saw it yesterday, and hopefully we're going to do a podcast with the filmmaker soon.
Great.
By Azad Singh.
Oh, great.
So it's amazing. Really, probably one of the most well-made documentaries on 1984. Like literally everything from the storytelling to like the special effects to the audio visual stuff. It was just amazing the way that, and it's taken a long time as well. I think they said since 2016 they've been making this. So it's literally, and they've also gone through so much hardship just to get it out there now, because they were saying like the Indian government called ahead to whatever venues they booked and basically told the venues to cancel.
Yeah.
And so there's still all this hardship that we're talking about is still going on today. The Indian government is still trying to suppress. So where we say it's a democracy, freedom of speech, all of this, it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, so that's something I'm going to be watching on Sunday as well, actually, so I can't wait for it. So there's so much to get involved with. I think the first thing is cluing yourself up as to what happened. And then also educating other people. You can go to your local Gurdwara and on the NSYF page and the Sikh Education Council page run by Harmandir Singh from Nojwani. They've got these great infographics that talks about the 1st to 10th of June, day by day. What I did literally last weekend is I printed them out, photocopied them, and made 3. And I just stuck them on the Gurdwara walls. So people that come, they'll see a picture that captures their attention and they might just read them and that might spark their interest in us. So I think it's important to get the conversation going and normalize people, to make it normal to talk about this in June 1984. And we need to get rid of that taboo. Just as we remember the Jewish community suffering at the hands of Hitler, our own community, as a minimum, should be acknowledging what's happened and then start thinking about steps to rectify and also learn from our past mistakes as well, whatever way, shape or form they were.
100%. And VG, have you more comments or questions?
I think just maybe to finish off, what does it mean for both of you, if you can answer, what does it mean to be Chardi Kala?
Yeah, so I think Chardi Kala, Chardi means continuously rising. Kala is your state, right? It's a state of always rising. And from both aspects, when bad things have come or really happy times come, not letting them change where you are, not letting them change your resolve, not getting too excited at times and not getting too down at times. And where does that come from? That, I guess you can call it, the world talks about being at peace or being calm or being at one with yourself, however you want to describe it. Guru Sahib has given us the prescription for this. And that is quite simply by reading Gurbani, by learning from your history, and by doing seva. Those 3 things will make you into such a human being that no matter what comes in your way, just as the Singhs and Singhni of the past did, whether there's the army tanks of the Indian army coming at you, or you're going through a stressful period in your life, whatever it is, you remain in a good, stable place. Stability was the word I was thinking of. So that's for me what Chardi Kala means. Always keeping faith in your guru, and realizing that there's always a bigger picture, whether something amazing is going on or something very dreadful's happened. And history is a great way of looking at that and learning from other people, because our history in some places has been very, very hard to fathom. You have, at the times of Mir Manu's jails, mothers, the children of mothers, their limbs being cut and put around their necks. How do you describe that to someone, right? And they're sitting there still reading Gurbani, not questioning it. Hopefully none of us have to go through things like that. But if you're clued up on your history, you'll know what the Panth's been through and how they've got through it.
Right.
That's started for me.
Very good. And any other comments or from yourself, your questions?
No, just thanks for raising awareness on it. And I think definitely this history belongs to us all. It's not for me, Mandeep Singh, or you guys to just learn about and then forget everyone else. This is a part of, if you define yourself as a Sikh, or if you go to the Gurdwara on a Sunday, whatever it is, this is your history and you're a part of this. Whether you want to take an active step towards that is up to you. But no matter how many of us try and shy away from it, we are all part of this. And whether it's something happens in the future, whether something currently happens in Punjab, we can't shy away from it. And it's really important that we don't, and we embrace it, and try our best to learn and be inspired from it.
Well, thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us today and all the research that you've done. And hopefully this is just a start of, many videos or series to come in the future, which we've been talking about for a long time. But again, these things do take time to prepare, because I know for yourself as well, if you do something, you're going to do it properly, right? So thank you for just giving us an overview. And I'm sure you say yourself, we're just scratching the surface. And we have got some good plans for the future. So, may that happen in the future. So good Karan. So again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this information. And hopefully we can continue to make more videos. If you've got any questions or any suggestions what we could do going forward as well, then please do. And again, the description, all the links to all the different organizations and Gurdwara Sikhs who have done save, and the books and stuff that you mentioned already as well. So thank you so much.
And forgive any mistakes.
Anji, mere paas ho bhi.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.